Yeah, let's get into that to that number 3 spot, and for me, this is where it kind of gets interesting. Although I have a feeling that we may all have the same team in the number 3 spot, but let's get into it. Case?
Yeah, I actually have Minnesota at number 3, and really I have them as the last playoff team in the Central, perhaps because the Pacific's got a good chance at taking both of the wild card spots, although I wouldn't be surprised if it gets split. Minnesota, a lot of subtractions from this team and not a lot of additions, other than obviously young guys coming into this lineup, but somehow the subtractions did not really affect any of the goal scoring, and I think that kind of eased my mind a little bit when I looked into it a little further. It's usually a team that is score by committee. They had some guys step up 2 years ago that, kind of shocked us in a Foligno and Hartman being, kind of leading it. But now they have Kaprizov and Boldy, who are that star scoring. Zuccarello somehow in the last 2 seasons has just avoided Father Time and is just putting up unbelievable numbers. So they still have him as well. And then there's lots of depth on this team. A lot of guys can contribute and at the meantime play some meaningful defense when it comes to forwards. One thing that kind of worries me about this team is I think they lack a true number 1C. I don't think that's a bold take at all. And I think that's everyone's opinion of this team. So it'll be interesting to see, if a Marco Rossi can reach that potential within the next 3 years, or if they're going to have to go out and find someone. And when I look at the back end, I mean, kind of no surprise that Minnesota has a good decor. I think it's always been the case, but I thought that it was going to take a step back, losing Adamba and Klingberg this year. But there's 2 guys that stepped up last year and are going to replace those spots no problem. Middleton has really stepped up as a fantastic defensive defenseman. I think he led the team in hits and blocks last year. He's going to play along with Spurgeon again, and that's going to be a great shutdown top pair. Callan Addison is another guy that stepped up big time last year. Some say that, maybe he needs to work on the defensive side of being a defenseman, but I looked into the analytics and he had the highest share of goals for on this entire team at like 66% of the goals scored were in favor of Minnesota when he was on the ice. So I think that, he's going to have another big year if they can get him signed. I think he's an RFA right now. And then Brock Faber is going to come into this team and fill in that last spot. So I do see this as still being a Minnesota strong defensive core. And then goaltending, question mark is out always for me is, can Gustafsson be that guy again? He was fantastic last year, 7th in goal save above expected. I don't think anyone saw that coming. So interested to see if he can be that guy again, and if Marc-Andre Fleury is also another player on this team avoiding Father Time. Special teams were pretty middle of the pack last year, and I would expect the same out of them this year. So I have them at 3. I'm fairly confident that they'll be 3rd in this division. You guys can try to convince me otherwise. I think it's a strong team, but they lack the wow of a Colorado or a Dallas Stars.
Yeah, I agree with Minnesota in the 3 spot. I have them as my 3rd and final playoff lock in this division. After that, I have a tier of 1 team where I've called it a playoff hopeful tier. And then I have a tier after that consisting of 3 teams that I have called playoff bubble tier. And then I have 1 team in the very bottom tier in the 8th spot called lottery tier. So I guess you guys can guess who that is. But yeah, the number 3 spot for Minnesota makes a lot of sense to me as well. I agree with a lot of what you said, Case. They don't have that high-end scoring outside of Kaprizov and Boldy, which, by the way, Boldy, I don't think gets enough credit around the league. For such a young player to come in and score at the pace that he's done, it's just incredible. Yeah. And I think Minnesota's hoping that Marco Rossi can be that player coming in this season for them. Marco Rossi's played 21 games in the NHL. He only has 1 point to show for it. But in the American League, he's about a point per game and has been ever since he stepped on to that North American ice, which is insane. So clearly that production isn't just going to fall off entirely. It'll catch up. He'll be a productive player. It just takes time, especially when you're a bit undersized. So I'm not overly worried about that, and I'm expecting Rossi to take a step as a middle six forward for this team this year. But with all that being said, it's kind of crazy that this team lost a defenseman of the caliber of Matt Dumba, and their D-core looks just as good, and you're not worried about it at all. So I'm not worried about the back end on this team. And then in terms of goaltending, Philip Gustafsson was a really good goaltender in Ottawa in a limited sample size the year that he was traded. I believe he was hurt for like half of the year or something leading up to that trade deadline. And so they didn't really know exactly what they were going to get in Minnesota, but ever since he's arrived, he's been exactly what this team needed. Now, I do think they'll go to a tandem situation again with Marc-Andre Fleury, but just think too, like, room has to be made for Jesper Wallstedt coming up, whether it's this season or next. So I don't know exactly what they're going to do with Fleury, but I think he's the clear number 2 now, whereas last season he was maybe a 1A in a 1A, 1B situation, whereas now I think he's the 1B or just the backup. So again, all of that being said, I think Minnesota is not a lock for the playoffs, but I think they're comfortably at number 3 in my mind. Harper, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with what a lot of you guys said there, and I have the Minnesota Wild locked in at 3 as well. Obviously, it sucks with the dead cap money from the Parise and Suter buyouts, but you know what? It didn't seem to impact this team too much. You've got your 2 stars up front in Boldy and Kaprizov. It'll be interesting to see what Marco Rossi can do, and they've got some really good underrated younger players in that forward group as well. The Duhaimes, the Dewars, Mason Shaw is another guy that I like as well, and then that back end is very underrated. Jonas Brodin is an excellent skater and just a really solid defenseman. Spurgeon, Brock Faber looked absolutely incredible coming right out of college. So yeah, kind of the same old song and dance for Minnesota. Perennial playoff team, a lot of fun to watch. But can they win a round? And that is the one question. It has been so long. Can they win a playoff round? It's kind of getting to the Maple Leafs with these guys. Obviously not now because they did win a round, but
First
now
round
we're kind of looking at Minnesota. When are they going to break through? But that being said, have them at number 3 and a lock to make the playoffs once again.